like it. We're able to monitor. So if you're watching and want to, and we'd be and answer questions. Today's program is a and in fact, community engagement learning tables, number 6, and trainings to connect you to the knowledge, the information, and the opportunity to the vision. What may be one of the most significant history. There's a 40 to help create creating these community engagement tables and having our people be and take our place at the table of public policy. His project is the Public Policy Project. He's founder and CEO. James, thank you for being here and thanks for all you're doing. And then finally, from the city of Minneapolis, Eric Hansen. Did I say it right, Eric? Give me your card too, because I just want to make sure that I properly present everybody course of the show. So Eric is the economic policy and development group at the Minneapolis Community Planning and Economic Development Department. So he's a city guy, but he's a resident of the city. Been here for a long time. He lived in North Minneapolis. He grew up, I think, in South Minneapolis around the lakes, but he's committed to the city. Straightforwardness in saying this is what it is. And the story that I liked when I first met Eric and heard him speak was his identifying the Upper Harbor, and he's speaking on behalf of the city as an equity. I think that this is a community that has failed the black community and poetry, but I think we're at a time
our community is informed about what's happening in their communities with around them, giving them the news. Engage our belief, right? So not intensive training on really how to be more civically engaged, be more civically active, and so forth. And then as it relates to this project, Upper Harbor Terminal, we created this process among many other processes that we created to make sure that this development that's happening, 48 acres, Upper Harbor Terminal, that North Minneapolis residents are at the table and are strategically and really centers on health, well residents. And so that's why we created this. The Public Policy Project, we brought together to really address environmental concerns, American change focus, when whatever's happening in the environment, that our community is like, this is affecting us. We need to be about environmental justice. We call these communities environmental justice communities, right? Because because we're the ones, right? North Minneapolis is ripe with several toxic corporations, manufacturing companies that are manufacturing items, but during the manufacturing, the pollutants are going in the air, and so you're looking at high levels of lead and asthma and so forth. And so the Environmental Justice Coordinating Council came together 2 years ago to really be at decision-making tables to make sure that whatever happens in the environment, that our voices are heard, and that we making decisions about how to change and rectify the situation.
Jamie asked you to invite our listeners to the event tomorrow night. It's
Yes.
Tomorrow, December 18th.
Yes.
And where's it going to be and what time and what will people find when they get there? We're going to say this several times during
That's
the course
right.
of the conversation.
That's
but
right.
Let's start early and do it often.
Yep. So tomorrow, the community engagement learning table is going to be at North Point Health and Wellness on the 5th floor. There's free parking. You park on the 3rd floor. The actual address is 1256 Penn, right there on the corner of Penn and Plymouth. It's the large building that Thor erected a few years ago. And again, tomorrow, December 18th, 4 to 8 p.m., North Point Conference Center, 1256 Penn Avenue. Actually, the rooms are going to be in 5203 and 5205, the 5th floor. And again, free parking all the way to the 3rd floor. And then you get off on the 3rd floor parking. You can go into the building, enter the elevator, go up to the 5th floor. And then when you exit the elevator, just keep straight, and you'll go to your right, right before you enter the North Point offices.
Okay, great. Well, it's a wonderful room. It's
Yes.
a great meeting space, and it's the perfect location, the corner of Plymouth and Penn.
And let me say this too.
Go
This is
ahead.
important because people need to know we feed you too. So you're going to eat.
There we go.
Right? So you don't have to worry about making food for your kids. You can
Yeah.
even bring your kids, right?
That-
And then they can eat,
that
right?
makes a
So
difference.
we're gonna feed people, and we're not talking about just cookies and milk. So we actually make sure people eat well.
James, let me take a minute and ask you about your own personal background. How do you come to this work? Where are you from?
Oh wow, I'm from Illinois, right? I moved here actually from
Chicago,
Chicago.
yeah.
I moved here actually from Chicago in 1990.
Born in
Actually,
Chicago?
I'm sorry.
Born in Chicago?
Not born and raised in Chicago. Born and raised outside Chicago.
Where?
So right close to Rockland, a place called the Quad Cities area.
Quad Cities, okay.
Yep. And then moved to
Is
Chicago.
that like
shortly
Quad
after.
Cities, like Moline? Is that
Yep. Well,
okay.
you got it. You got
Okay.
it. So there's Moline, East Moline, Rock Island, Davenport.
Okay.
You know, those
Yeah.
are the cities that make up the
Quad Cities.
Quad Cities, right?
Right.
And then moved
Okay.
to Chicago after that, right?
Okay.
And so I moved my family here from Chicago, 1990, to Minneapolis, and
let's talk about you growing up in Chicago. You grew up in Moline or grew up in Chicago?
no, grew up in Moline actually.
Okay.
Yep,
Okay. What
yep.
kind of community did you grow up in?
You know, it was kind of diverse community, but we still had our issues, right? With discrimination and so forth, but we fought through it. I mean, most of the people are hungry. You know, we black folk and mostly black community, right? We did have white folks live around us, but mostly, it was pretty well populated with African American and other communities of color. So,
And how did you make your way from Quad Cities to Chicago?
oh wow. That's a long story, man. We'd take a whole bunch of time because I moved there. I moved to North Carolina first after I left the Quad Cities, moved to North Carolina. I was working as a youth director for a large company in Charlotte, North Carolina. Left there, moved to Chicago. Did some work on the south side of Chicago as a youth director in the south side of Chicago. Did that for a while. Got married, had family, right, raising kids. Got to the point where I realized, again, working in Chicago, working with at-risk youth, and seeing all the stuff they're dealing with, and the gang activity in Chicago. And once I had my son, and I said, oh wow, when he got to about 3 years old, 4 years old, and I saw all the struggles that young people were facing in the high school in Chicago, in school, and I said, I don't want my son to go through this. I need to move him out of Chicago.
It was that deep.
Yeah, it was.
That
It was
personal.
that deep
personal.
that my
And
wife
so
and I
the-
looked at each other and
So the
said,
environment was
Yes.
so stressful
it was.
that you had to make a decision to physically remove yourself from that environment to find somewhere else so that you would feel safe
Yes.
and be able to be responsible in raising your son in
Yeah.
particular.
I mean, anytime you could go to church on Sunday and gang members walk in the church on Sunday with guns on them and they pull a gun out on you next to
In church.
right? In church,
Yeah.
right? And I said, oh, no. So my wife we got pregnant with our first daughter, our oldest daughter, and we realized we can't stay here. We need to move out of Chicago. And we moved to Minneapolis. And, I say this, and it's not, I don't say this in jest, but at first I did. we moved here and we Minneapolis was saying they had a gang problem. And I said, no, you don't have a gang problem. You have a youth problem.
Right.
Chicago has a gang problem.
Right.
I said, Minneapolis is milquetoast compared to South Side Chicago or West Side Chicago.
Yeah.
I said, y'all don't have the issue that we have in Chicago. So we were cool moving to Minneapolis because there was no neighborhood, no community in Minneapolis or in the state of Minnesota that I was afraid to walk down the street. In Chicago, there are neighborhoods that I was afraid to walk down the street.
You know, let me show you how global this thing is. Okay. As you're speaking, you reminded me of when I was in the Navy and was walking in Naples on shore duty, right? Just shore, like overnight shore duty, what do they call it? And these 9, 10, 12-year-old kids operated in packs, in little gangs, and they come up and pretend to be friendly. Hey, Joe, hey, soul brother, you know, smiling, so you kind of taken aback by the friendliness. And while they reaching at you, patting you on the shoulder, they patting you on your pocket and cutting out your back pocket and taking your money, and robbing you smoothly. So I said, man, this is what gangs are, you know. So we end up denigrating our own selves sometimes when we think we got a problem that isn't. And what you're saying, the same thing in Chicago compared to Minneapolis.
Right.
Let me bring another voice in before he has to leave. Bill English is here. And thank you for sharing that, because I think that I wanted to connect with what motivates you to do the work.
And let me say, in no way am I minimizing the problems that exist here in Minneapolis. I'm not at all.
Absolutely. But you're putting it in context.
Put it in perspective.
And so that we're not isolated here.
Yes.
And we're part of a global process, a global system, and the global objective everywhere is justice, it's freedom, it's dignity, and it's our humanity, and that, at the end of the day, is not negotiable.
Right.
And how do we get there as a people? Bill, what do you think? You've been around this community a long, long time. And I want to get your impression on the just this conversation. And pull the mic over to you here.
Sure. Couple of things, Al. First of all, as you know, I've been in Minneapolis since 1960. I grew up in East St. Louis. Came here from Ypsilanti, Michigan, from Eastern Michigan to go to grad school. Ended up staying at to drop out of grad school for personal family illness, etc. But anyway, and my history is pretty well known. I won't get into that. But the issue of marginalized youth, the evolution of gangs, has come from the disruption and the long history in this country of separating black families. It goes all the way back to slavery. Whether it's the welfare system or whatever, separating black men who couldn't welfare in family. Then the drug infestation. Everybody knows how drugs came into our community, particularly hard during the CIA. I don't know. All I know is the outcomes. But I think it's important for us today to do this, and so I'm convinced that for African Americans in particular, and North Side residents in general, to benefit from the previous marginalization and redlining and all the other bad things that happened, is a unique opportunity for us to change the paradigm. I trust this process. Why do I trust this process? Because I'm typically a constructive critic of the establishment, city government, county government, state. Everybody knows my record. But what I found out is, quite frankly, that this idea of the upper terminal has started off very different than land development. Not has been the most perfect way of redeveloping land, but it is a way that started with community engagement. Out of that community engagement came the concept to the American Planning Department to frame this under equity, diversity, and inclusion, and laid out a concept that had been previously agreed upon by the community and the city council. And they formed this community advisory committee to take this concept and, from my perspective, get as much out of it as we can for our community. So my goal from day one was to take this concept. Now, we remember we were all appointed with a mandate and a charter and a timetable. Accept that, then in my mind, you shouldn't accept a position on the advisory committee. That was our mandate, that was our charge. So I've operated from that frame of reference. Having said that, we have an opportunity to do several things. Somehow, there are significant decisions to be made. What is meant by community ownership? We're in the process of defining that. How many units of housing, what that housing will look like? We're in the process of determining that. The councilors gave us an opportunity to make strong recommendations about what that housing mix needs to look like. Number three, not over residentialized, but none of that. And the Upper Harbor terminals allows us to change that. And the city seems willing to advance that concept of a business park up until phase one. We're going to, I think we can end up recommending that. That would allow them to put in the infrastructure for the first phase, which is the amphitheater that the city will own.
Mm-hmm.
First Avenue will operate, but that's a community ownership. Then the business park. We will, if the development takes place and the city and the developers are interested in not necessarily selling the land, I think I can say this, but will consider leasing the land. That means it stays in community hands through our elected officials. So it seems to me we got broad room for defining community ownership in the best interest of the community and the city, and to pull the development off. If nothing happens on the Mississippi River, we lose the opportunity to have the same kind of access to the river that people further south down other communities all the way down to New Orleans. The river's been developed in my hometown of East St. Louis. East St. Louis side, in that it sits right with me to push the, operate within the concept, mandate, and grab as much out of it can for our community, unabashedly. Mm-hmm. Though I recognize there and the legacy there, black and needs to be heard, and we need to benefit from this as much as we can. I've never been against discriminating against any race or ethnic group, but I am saying more than that, but our fair share. And this committee is working hard. It's challenging, it's long hours, it starts at 4, that's traffic and everything else, but people have been showing up. We got a committed group of people, and I really think we have an opportunity. They've given us
conversations with Al McFarland, Harbor, the 18th.